My mother threw a trash bag at my feet and told me I had 48 hours to get out of her house. I was 17 years old. It was February. There was still snow on the ground. The bag landed at my feet with a soft, pathetic thud, and for a second I just stared at it. 2 decades of being her daughter, and this is what it came down to: a black trash bag and 48 hours. "You think you're so special," she said. She was standing in the kitchen doorway with her arms crossed, her voice flat and cold in that particular way that meant she'd already made up her mind long before this conversation started. "You think that little restaurant idea is going to save you? You'll be crawling back here in 3 months. Mark my words." My father didn't say anything. He was sitting at the kitchen table looking at his coffee cup like it held the answers to questions he didn't want to ask. He'd always been like that, present but absent, there but not there. I didn't cry. I remember being surprised by that. I picked up the trash bag, went upstairs, and packed everything that mattered into my actual suitcase. My knives, my notebooks full of recipes I'd been writing since I was 12. The $840 I'd saved from 3 years of washing dishes at the diner down the street. My grandmother's cast iron skillet, which my mother would have thrown away anyway since she never learned to season it properly. I left the trash bag on the floor of my room, empty. The reason for all of this was simple and, looking back, almost funny in how small it was. I had been accepted into a culinary apprenticeship program in Chicago, 18 months fully funded, with one of the most respected pastry chefs in the country. I'd applied without telling them because I already knew what they'd say. They said it anyway. My mother wanted me to go to the same state university she'd gone to, study business like she had, and eventually come back to our town in Ohio and live the version of my life that she'd already written in her head. That was the plan. It had always been the plan. The fact that I'd never agreed to it didn't seem to matter. When the acceptance letter came, I made the mistake of being happy about it at dinner. My mother put down her fork. "You applied to what?" I explained it again. "The apprenticeship, Chicago, 18 months, paid." "Cooking," she said. Not a question. More like she was tasting the word and finding it bitter. "Pastry, specifically. Chef Laurent's program. It's extremely competitive, only 8 spots. You are not moving to Chicago to flip pancakes for some Frenchman. He's actually Belgian. I don't care if he's the Pope." She stood up. "You're 17 years old. You don't know what you want. You're going to do something with your life, something real, and you are not throwing it away on a hobby." My father looked at his plate. I looked at my mother and understood, clearly and completely for the first time, that she wasn't angry because she was worried about me. She was angry because I was doing something she hadn't approved. There's a difference. It took me years to be able to put words to it, but I felt it then, sitting at that dinner table in our house in Ohio, snow starting to fall outside the window. 2 weeks later, the trash bag. I called my friend, the only person I trusted back then, from a gas station payphone because my mother had taken my phone. She drove 40 minutes in the dark to pick me up. She let me sleep on her couch for 3 weeks without asking me for anything except that I stop apologizing for being there. I got to Chicago in March. The first 6 months were genuinely hard in a way I don't think I could have understood before living it. The apprenticeship provided a small stipend, but Chicago is not cheap, and a small stipend is not enough. I shared a studio apartment with 2 other apprentices, sleeping on a mattress on the floor, eating whatever mistakes came out of the test kitchen that day. There were nights I ate burnt croissants for dinner and told myself it was a learning experience. It was, actually. Everything was. Chef Laurent, and I will say this for the rest of my life, was one of those rare people who teaches by making you pay attention, not to technique first, to flavor, to memory, to what you're trying to make someone feel when they take the first bite. He used to say that anyone can follow a recipe, but cooking is translation. You're taking something invisible, an emotion, a memory, a moment, and making it something a person can hold in their hands and taste. I wrote everything down, Every correction, every observation, every mistake. I filled 3 notebooks in 18 months. I didn't call my parents. They didn't call me. That was the agreement, unspoken but understood. I had left, which in my mother's language meant I had chosen my path and forfeited the right to come back and complain about it. Fine, I wasn't complaining. After the apprenticeship ended, I stayed in Chicago. I got a job at a restaurant on the north side as a line pastry cook. It paid almost nothing, but I was building something. I could feel it the way you can feel a dough developing under your hands. The texture changing, the structure forming, something alive happening that wasn't there before. But before I tell you what happened next and what happened at the end of all of this, I need to ask you something. What time is it where you are right now, and where are you watching from? Drop it in the comments. I genuinely want to know who's listening to this. I worked at that restaurant for 4 years. I moved up. I became the head pastry chef at 23, which sounds impressive until you understand that head pastry chef at a mid-sized Chicago restaurant in your early 20s means you are doing the work of 3 people for the salary of one. But I wasn't doing it for the salary. I was doing it because I had an idea. I've been sitting on the idea since my second year in the apprenticeship. A small cafe, nothing fancy. The kind of place where the pastries are made from scratch every morning, where the recipes rotate with the seasons, where people come in once and then keep coming back because something about the food makes them feel like they're home. I wanted to call it something simple, something that didn't try too hard. I called it Wren and Flower. The name came from my grandmother. She used to say that a wren is the smallest bird that sings the loudest. She said that about me when I was little, when I was scared of everything but couldn't stop talking. I don't know why that stuck, but it did. Opening a bakery cafe in Chicago requires money I did not have. I spent 8 months writing a business plan, researching locations, applying for small business loans, getting rejected, revising, applying again. I found a space in Logan Square, a former flower shop with big windows and original tile floors and a back room that was almost exactly the right size for a serious kitchen. The rent was high but not impossible. A local small business development organization helped me access a microloan. I maxed out one credit card and started another. I called in every favor anyone had ever owed me. My friend from back home, the one who'd driven to pick me up in the snow, sent me $500 she said was a gift and not a loan, and I was not allowed to argue about it. Wren and Flower opened on a Thursday morning in April, 4 years after I left Chicago for the apprenticeship, 7 years after my mother threw that trash bag at my feet. The line was out the door by 8 a.m. I don't say that to brag. I say it because I stood in the back kitchen watching through the service window and cried for approximately 45 seconds, then washed my face, put my apron back on, and went back to work. There was no time to be emotional. We were 3 people running a cafe with a line out the door. The first year was terrifying. We were profitable by month 6, which my accountant said was almost unheard of. I hired 2 more people. I started a weekend brunch service that became, somehow, one of those things people drive from the suburbs for. A food magazine came and wrote a piece about us. Another publication called Wren and Flower, Quietly Essential, which I printed out and taped to the inside of the storage room door so I could see it every morning. I was happy. Genuinely, quietly, solidly happy in a way I hadn't expected happiness to feel. I'd always imagined it would feel like relief, like exhaling after holding your breath for a long time. But it didn't feel like that. It felt like being exactly where you're supposed to be, doing exactly what you're supposed to do. Calm, purposeful. I wasn't thinking about my parents. That's the truth. I wasn't angry anymore, hadn't been for a while. I'd just moved past them somehow. They existed in the part of my mind labeled before, and I lived almost entirely in now. And then the piece ran. Not the food magazine piece, a different one. A profile in a regional lifestyle publication, the kind of glossy thing that shows up in dentist offices and hotel lobbies across the Midwest. They'd found out about my background, about the apprenticeship, about opening Wren and Flower. The writer had done her homework. The piece was generous and specific and, at one point, quoted me saying that I'd left home at 17 with a suitcase and my grandmother's cast iron skillet, and that the best decision I ever made was the one my family told me I'd regret. I didn't think much about it. I did the interview, approved the quotes, went back to work. 3 days after it published, my phone rang. I didn't recognize the number. Ohio area code. I almost didn't answer. My mother's voice on the other end was different from how I remembered it. Smaller. Careful, in the way people are careful when they're not sure how they'll be received. I read the article, she said. I sat down on a crate in the storage room and looked at the words quietly essential taped to the door. Okay, I said. You look good in the photo. I didn't say anything. Your father and I. She stopped. Started again. We've been having a hard time these last couple of years. His health hasn't been great, and I. Another pause. I thought maybe we could talk. There it was. I'd imagined this moment before, when I was younger and angrier. I'd imagined what I'd say. I had entire speeches ready. Righteous, devastating speeches about everything they'd done, every door they'd slammed, every letter they'd never sent. Sitting on that crate in my storage room, I didn't feel like giving a speech. I'm going to need some time, I said. I'll call you back. I hung up. I sat in the storage room for a long time after that. Long enough that my assistant chef knocked on the door to ask if I was okay. I said yes, come back in 5 minutes. Then I sat for another 10. Here's the thing they don't tell you about people who hurt you when you were young. They get old. They get sick. They have problems that have nothing to do with you. And those problems are real. And at some point, you have to figure out what you're going to do with that fact. My father had a heart attack the previous winter. I found this out 2 weeks later from my aunt, who tracked down my email address through a series of efforts I still find touching. She wasn't asking me to reconcile, she just thought I should know. My father was okay, she said. He was recovering, but he'd asked about me. He'd asked about me. I put my phone face down on the counter and made 17 croissants. The thing about my mother calling wasn't that it surprised me. I'd known somewhere that it was coming eventually. What surprised me was my own reaction, which was not the satisfaction I'd expected. It wasn't relief either. It was something closer to exhaustion. The particular exhaustion of carrying something heavy for a long time and suddenly being offered a place to set it down and not being sure yet whether you trust the offer. I called my aunt back. I asked some questions. She answered honestly, which I appreciated. My parents were struggling financially. My father's medical bills had stacked up over the winter, a bypass surgery followed by a long recovery that kept him from working. My mother had been managing on her own, which she was not good at, because she'd always assumed my father would simply not get sick and had planned their finances accordingly. They were behind on the mortgage. They'd borrowed against savings they didn't have anymore. She doesn't want charity, my aunt said. I think she just wants you back. I sat with that for a week. What I kept coming back to was not the money or even the apology, which hadn't happened yet and I wasn't counting on. What I kept coming back to was that February night, the snow outside, the trash bag hitting the linoleum floor, and then immediately after, my friend's headlights in the parking lot of that gas station, the car warm, music playing softly. Two things can be true at the same time. That's what I'd learned in 8 years of building something out of nothing. Your worst moments and your best ones don't cancel each other out. They just both happened. They're both yours. I called my mother back on a Sunday morning before the cafe opened. I told her I wasn't ready to pretend nothing had happened. I told her I wasn't going to show up and play the role of the prodigal daughter who came home grateful. I told her I needed her to understand, really understand, not just say the words, that what they did when I was 17 wasn't discipline. It wasn't tough love, it was abandonment. And it had consequences I was still sorting through, and I was not going to act like it hadn't happened. My mother was quiet for a long time. Then she said, I know. Just that. 2 words. But they landed differently than I expected. We talked for 2 hours that morning. I missed the beginning of brunch rep and my assistant had to call me twice. I sat in my car in the parking lot outside Ren and Flower and talked to my mother for the first time in 8 years. She didn't excuse herself. She didn't explain. She talked about fear, mostly how scared she'd been back then, not of me, but of something she couldn't name. Some version of me succeeding at something she'd never understood and never bothered to understand. She talked about my father, how his heart attack had rearranged something in both of them. She cried. I didn't, at first, and then I did. A little, in the way you cry when something you've been carrying for a long time finally admits it has weight. We didn't fix anything that morning. You don't fix 8 years in a phone call. But I did something after we hung up that I hadn't planned to do. I contacted a nonprofit that helps families navigate medical debt. They work with hospitals directly, negotiate bills, connect people to assistance programs they often don't know exist. I gave them my parents' information with my mother's permission. I didn't write a check. I didn't pay the bills myself. But I made the call and I sat on hold for 40 minutes and I talked to a caseworker named someone I've now forgotten and I got the process started. It wasn't forgiveness exactly. It wasn't reconciliation either. Not yet. It was just a door, cracked open, not thrown wide, not locked shut, just slightly open in a way that let a little light through without committing to anything I wasn't ready for. My father called me 2 weeks later. It was a short call. He is not a man of many words, and I have made a certain peace with that. He said he was proud of me. He said he read the article 3 times. He said the cafe sounded like something my grandmother would have loved. I told him she would have eaten the croissants for breakfast and then asked for more to bring home. He laughed. It was the first time I'd heard him laugh since I was a teenager. Ren and Flower is 4 years old now. We added a second location last spring in Wicker Park, run by someone I trust with the recipes and the early mornings and the particular atmosphere of the place. We have a waiting list for weekend reservations. I still work the line on Saturday mornings because that's when I'm happiest. Flour on my apron, the kitchen loud, the cases full of things I made with my own hands. My mother came to visit once, 6 months after that first phone call. She sat at a table by the window and ordered coffee and a cardamom morning bun and ate the whole thing without speaking. Then she looked up at me and said, "This is really good." Coming from her, that was a lot. I nodded. I refilled her coffee. I went back to work. That's where things are now, not wrapped up, not resolved into something clean and easy. My parents and I talk maybe once a month. It is sometimes awkward and sometimes surprisingly normal and occasionally still painful. I don't know if I've forgiven them. I think forgiveness might be less of a destination than I always imagined, more like a practice, something you choose repeatedly, not once. What I know for certain is that I am not the girl who stood in that driveway in February holding a suitcase in the snow, terrified and furious and absolutely sure she was making a mistake. I am the woman who opened a bakery cafe at 25 with a maxed out credit card and her grandmother's cast iron skillet, who filled 3 notebooks in 18 months, who cried for 45 seconds on opening day and then went back to work. I'm lolt this, out of nothing, out of spite and love and stubbornness and an unreasonable amount of belief in the thing I was making. The trash bag my mother threw at my feet is gone. The cast iron skillet is still in my kitchen. I use it every day. Some things you leave behind, some things you carry forward. The trick is knowing which is which. I've thought about that trash bag a lot over the years. Not with anger anymore, just with a kind of quiet recognition. My mother didn't throw it at my feet because she hated me. She threw it because she was afraid of something she couldn't name, and fear, when it has nowhere else to go, comes out looking like cruelty. That doesn't make it okay, but it helps me understand it. Here's what I've come to believe. After 8 years of building something with my own hands, the life you end up with is almost never the result of one big dramatic choice. It's the accumulation of small ones. The decision to get back up after the loan rejection. The decision to stay in the kitchen at midnight when you're exhausted and everything hurts and nothing is working yet. The decision, when your mother calls after 8 years of silence, to sit with the discomfort instead of hanging up. I made a lot of those small decisions when no one was watching. That's the part that matters most and gets talked about least. When I left Ohio at 17 with $840 and a cast iron skillet, I didn't have a plan. I had a direction. There's a difference. A plan assumes you know the terrain. A direction just means you've decided which way you're facing. The terrain was always going to surprise me, and it did, constantly, in ways both brutal and extraordinary. What carried me through wasn't luck. It was the willingness to keep learning, even when learning felt humiliating. Chef Laurent used to stop me mid motion, take the pastry brush out of my hand, and show me again, slowly, without apology, how to do it right. I could have been embarrassed. Instead, I paid attention. That's not a small thing. The ability to stay curious when you're struggling, to keep asking questions instead of pretending you already have the answers. I think that's one of the most underrated forms of courage there is. And then there's the question of what you do with the people who try to diminish you. My mother called expecting. I don't know what she expected. Maybe for me to collapse the distance between us because she'd finally decided she was ready. What she got instead was someone who'd spent 8 years becoming too honest to pretend. I told her the truth, all of it. Not to punish her, I was genuinely past wanting to punish her, but because I'd learned that the relationships worth having are the ones built on what actually happened, not on a comfortable version of it. That took a kind of moral clarity I had to grow into. It didn't come naturally. It came from years of deciding, over and over again, who I wanted to be in situations where it would have been easier to be someone else. I think the most dangerous thing a person can do is mistake other people's fear for truth. My parents were afraid, and they called that fear wisdom, and they tried to hand it to me like a gift. I refused it. Not because I was brave. I was terrified, honestly, most of the time that first year, but because somewhere underneath the fear I knew what I was capable of, even if I couldn't prove it yet. The skillet is still in my kitchen. Some things you carry forward because they remind you not of where you came from, but of who you chose to become on the way.